Let me try again. Happy Advent. And Happy New Year. Okay, I'm not rushing the season. We know in the church we have a different way of marking time. And in the church, because we're special, we mark time in a liturgical way. We have names of seasons, and we begin again today, the first Sunday of Advent. And it begins our cycle of this Advent, then Christmas, then Epiphany, then Lent, then Easter, then Pentecost, and Ascension and Pentecost. And then ordinary time, the rest of the year. So this is the very beginning. It's a time to start over, time to begin again. And we do things peculiarly in the church. We begin with the ending. Now, if you came to church in expectation on the first Sunday of Advent of hearing about angels, shepherds, lambs, thank you, choir, for providing that for us, so they've taken the pressure off of the preacher to explain that actually in Advent we start with the end of time. And the lessons are kind of stern, they're not, the kind of thing you'd expect to hear on Christmas Eve. But they are part of the story. For the earliest Christians, they weren't that interested in the birth of Jesus. They didn't even tell the stories that are familiar to us for a few generations. But they were keenly interested in the return of Jesus. They couldn't believe that all that they had experienced would come to an end and he was no longer present to them bodily. They experienced a taste of that in the resurrection. But they also believed firmly that Jesus would be present again to them and would return even in a grand way. And that's the second coming of Christ. They were aware of the first coming, but they lived in daily anticipation of a return, a time of vindication for all their sufferings and where their hopes and longings would find fruition. So we start our Advent, our Christmas preparation, our time of creating an opening so that there will be a way, a place for the Word made flesh to dwell among us on Christmas Eve. We start it as they used to start it, looking at the end times. I know it's a little bit of a downer, but I do promise we will get to Christmas Eve in 4 weeks. And I am grateful that the choir gave us tastes of that this morning, because part of what makes the waiting possible is knowing that there will be a resolution, a joyful resolution, one where all the promises that are found in our scriptures and all our yearnings and longings will be met in us in the birth of Christ on Christmas Eve. So, a little serious to begin with, but stick with Advent because there is joy at the end, I promise. The word Advent means arrival. And so it is a way of preparing for the arrival of the infant child, Jesus. But it's also a way of preparing ourselves for a return of Christ. Now, in our liberal traditions in the United Church of Christ and the Disciples of Christ, we're a little iffy on the return part. Doesn't mean it's not there, doesn't mean it's not important. But we have tended to focus more on the in-between, the first time Jesus was here, and how shall we then live our lives. But in some traditions, religious traditions, Christian traditions, treat the ending very seriously, and they live in daily anticipation of Christ's return in a way that parallels some of the things that are described in the scriptures. I had a great pleasure recently of going to the Fox Theater opened and hearing one of my favorite muses from my younger years, Patti Smith, perform on the 50th anniversary of her recording album, remember those, called Horses. So there we were, a group of us in our 60s, 70s, 80s, rocking out with Patti Smith, the mother of punk and rock and roll, on stage. And I will tell you that at nearly 80, she gave a performance that rivaled anything that I had seen in the actual 50 years that I've been going to Patti Smith events. Patti Smith is a great musician. She's also a poet, and she grew up in the Jehovah's Witness church, or Kingdom Hall, as they call them. And It's a particular sect of Christianity that lives with a daily expectation of the return of Christ. This is what she described, the process she went through as a young person with a vivid imagination, hearing about the day of judgment that would come and the end of the world as we know it, and a new heaven and a new earth coming to take its place. She believed the stories as they were told to her literally. Because of her vivid imagination, she lived a lot of her life sometimes in fear of what this might mean. But she was a questioning person also. This is how she describes her own experience of apocalypse. That's what this is about, the end of the world. They use the word apocalypse. And this is from her new memoir, Bread of Angels. I have all of her albums and all of her books. Increasingly moody, I sat in Bible study, plagued with disquieting thoughts, forming opinions about interpretations of scriptures. I listened intently to an elder describing the apocalypse and the creation of a new world, and was overcome with jarring images of museums, sculptures, great architecture, to say nothing of Picasso's paintings in flames. These thoughts churned in my conscience, burrowing a small hole, interrupting my sleep. I fretted over the aesthetics of the post-apocalypse, the decor of Christ's kingdom. What will happen to art? This question meant everything to me, even as it was scoffed at. I was shaken when a respected man from the congregation dismissively waved me away. Days later, I spoke to another elder, voicing my concern. Perhaps I was too confrontational, for I was swiftly admonished. At that time, questioning the high-ranking elders in our congregation was unacceptable. I was told that there was no place for art in Christ's kingdom, and I was counseled to consider what I truly believed in. But I knew what I believed in. I believed in the Creator, the many tongues of nature, the moral lessons of fairy tales, the language of trees and the clay of the earth. I believed in the wool gatherers and soul catchers and monks who could leave their physical body and travel. I labored to form an equation that would include all things: God, the infinite realm, Jesus, the human bridge, and the artist, the material mouthpiece. In the night, I searched for a solution. The atmosphere seemed to contain a sense of ancestral messaging. I considered those way back in time, gazing at skies and forming constellations, pictures generated by human imagination. Perhaps those who had the eyes to see pictures were some of our first artists. As a Jehovah's Witness, I had placed my faith in the new system, but I wondered if there were many systems. Once it was believed that there was only one planet, one solar system, but in truth we discovered that there are so many. It seemed to me being an artist was also a sacred profession, requiring a great sacrifice. I spent many sleepless nights before making the decision to cease my Bible studies and not return to the Kingdom Hall. At the same time, I was more than grateful for the intense scriptural education I had received. I cast off my religion, not without escaping a bitter sorrow, yet also accompanied by a feeling of liberation. I had chosen my own path, gave my evolving self to art, and decided to prepare myself for the life of an artist, pledging to be steadfast no matter what the consequences. I love this spirit of hers because I would call it a prophetic spirit, one that enabled her to see, appreciating the tradition, but also see the possibilities beyond the confines of tradition and traditional interpretation. Patti Smith was moved by music and by art, and that helped her see things that others were unwilling or unable yet to see. And that's what prophets do. They sometimes concede at least possibilities, if not inevitabilities. And they call upon us to read the signs and to pay attention closely to how God is being revealed in the world, because it can reveal to us ways in which God will be present to us. Prophets aren't always easy people to listen to or to be around. Remember that I'm full of 60s references today, 60s and 70s references. Simon Garfunkel saying, "The words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement walls, in the sounds of silence." Prophets call us to really pay attention and look closely. In them, in the Hebrew Scriptures this season. We'll listen to Isaiah, as we did earlier, to Jeremiah, to some others. And they do sometimes foretell doom, but they also foretell hope. And in this passage, Jesus himself is a kind of prophet, urging people to pay attention to what's happening so that when God returns, we won't miss it. And it won't be a time of judgment, but a time of grace and love and renewal. And Jesus begins this teaching with the disciples today, talking about the Son of Man. And that's a word we might translate also in our church in Belmont. We would use an inclusive translation, the human one. It means in the Bible, the human representative, the people's person. So Jesus thinks of himself as a representative person. And he says, when the Son of Man comes, or the child of humanity, or the people's person, the people's representative, it'll be like when the flood came in Noah's time. And no one was prepared for it until it was upon them. He says there will be two in the field working, and one will be taken, and one will be left alone. Two women will be grinding, and one will be taken, and one will be left. Keep awake, Jesus says to them, lest this happen to you, and you be left unprepared. Now, I stipulated at the beginning, this is kind of a stern message for the beginning of Advent. Don't forget, we're going to get to angels and shepherds and lambs, I promise. But at the very beginning, Jesus says, if you really want to get the most out of what's happening right now, pay attention. Because God's return or God's presence is not far from us. It's very, very near. You must be ready for the human one's coming at an unexpected hour. The apocalypse is upon us. So, the prophets who say this in Advent are not easy to hear. They're saying, be prepared, things are going to change, it will seem like a whole new world. John the Baptist is another one that we'll hear from a little bit later in the month, whose Advent greeting was, you brood of vipers. Not exactly how you want to greet people in church on Sunday morning. But these prophets are telling us, inviting us, urging us to be prepared for an apocalypse in our own lives, in the world around us, something that will shake us so much that it will be different for us ever afterwards. It'll feel like an ending, but they assure us those endings are also beginnings. Apocalypse, an end time. I know that I have lived through some in my own life. Tomorrow is World AIDS Day, and I was sad to see our president say on Wednesday that we were no longer to observe World AIDS Day as a country, and that no government employee was to promote World AIDS Day either in their personal social media or they would be disciplined. You know what that means. It's as if he's saying, if we don't pay attention to it, then maybe it's not happening. But we know it's happening. We know that our own government even has cut off aid to people who are living with AIDS and HIV right now in other countries, cutting it off suddenly. My own experience of AIDS it was in the 1980s, when up until the very moment it happened, we didn't believe that our world would change in such a dramatic way. But it happened suddenly. And because of it, my life and the life of the people who lived through it at that time are forever different. We had an apocalypse, if you will. The world, the way we knew it, ended. People our age, my age back then, were dying in large numbers. And that continues to happen still when people don't have access to health care. So what that apocalypse felt like was lonely isolation, fearful. What changed was the coming of the human one, the inbreaking of God's presence to us through our response with each other to make sure that no one was ever alone, that no one died without dignity or companionship or compassion. I don't believe that God sends the apocalypses in our lives? I do think that they happen. Momentous changes where we feel out of control and where hope is hard to find. But where God is in this is in the coming of the human one. The coming of, to use the language of Jesus as it's translated for us conventionally, the Son of Man. It isn't the apocalypse that has the final word. It's the return of humanity, the return of divinity. It is how we respond in it to and with each other. I know that I experienced that, and I saw it happening and unfolding in the lives of people around me. We did not feel God's absence then. We experienced God's nearness in how we were with each other. Even when churches preached the absence of God, the punishment of the judgment of God, by being loving, compassionate, present, healing people, the human one returned. And we experienced the power of love that is stronger than death. I believe those apocalypses happen all the time, those endings. And I also believe the return, the beginning again. I'll tell you candidly, I had not preached in a month because I couldn't bring myself to speak in public. I had fallen off my game, if you will, because of my own fears of my apocalyptic event, being diagnosed with prostate cancer. And fortunately, I've gone through treatment, and I'm going to be finding out soon what might need to happen next. But I did feel like an apocalypse in the moment that I lost my game. I don't know how else to say it. So much that I was even afraid to get up and preach in public. I felt it return. I felt the return of the human one through the response of my congregation, who gave me space to sleep 12 hours a day when I needed to, which has been true until just very recently, as the radiation has worn off. My roommates said, "Oh, welcome back," because I just couldn't do it. I couldn't be awake more than 12 hours, and I tired easily. So I experienced them in their patience and in their love and in their compassion and in the compassion of friends and others connected with other people who had this experience, some which were far more difficult than I had to experience. This is how apocalypse works. Things will happen to shake up our lives, but we have a role to play when apocalypses take place in making sure that we can all embody the return of Christ. It's a story that we tell about Christmas, but it really has an application for our lives here and now. I want to say a few things also to us on this first Sunday of Advent, particular to this group, this particular gathering. This is a gathering of the Congregational Church of the Peninsula, which is a fusion, and there are representatives of both fusions here, of the Congregational Church of Belmont and the Congregational Church, the First Congregational Church in Redwood City, that 2 years ago found their way to each other. Actually, it's been happening over several years' time. And then also today, we are gathering with at the Community Church of San Carlos, which I just want to say, as an aside, feels very historic to me, and I'm very grateful to you at the Congregational Community Church of San Carlos. In 1972, you made a decision that was prophetic before its time to ordain Reverend Bill Johnson to the ministry. And that was in 1972, and he was openly gay. And because of that, first in the United Church of Christ, people like me are able to stand here today and in nearly half the United Church of Christ congregations. That act of prophecy brought life and light to literally thousands of LGBTQ people who thought that they didn't have a place. And I'm so proud that the Belmont Church at the time and San Carlos Church were participants together alongside in that. We played an important role. And even in the calling of our own Reverend Wendy some years later, which became a fulfillment of that promise. So this is that gathering. It's not a historic meeting. I'm grateful to you just for that. I hope you feel that gratitude. I can't wait to tell Bill Johnson that I preached here today. He's still alive, but maybe 5 months. But here's what I want to say to us as this unique gathering. Let's pay attention together to what's happening to church in our area, to Congregationalist churches. There used to be more of us, and now we are smaller. And I don't know where that's going to go. But I do think that there is some possibility of something creative that maybe we don't know what the answer is yet to that. But I want to urge us to pay attention together, to wait together, to be in relationship with each other, so that what sometimes looks like an apocalypse in the United Church of Christ, I'm going to say it, there were 10 years ago 130 UCC churches in Northern California. Now there are maybe 100. That's a precipitous decline. And out of that, new birth, new things happen. It's an advent of a new incarnation. And I think that our two churches have a role to play in it. I don't want to say the merger word. I don't want to say the federation word. I just want to say, let's be in relationship more deeply together. Because here's what I know about waiting for whatever is going to happen. It's better when we wait and listen and watch together in relationship with each other. Detached from an outcome, but open to new possibilities. Here's what I learned. I came to Belmont rather late, just as the merger was happening. But what I learned was that the two churches had been talking, and Belmont Church was able to pose this question to Redwood City. What do you want? What would you like to see happen? And Belmont Church was also able to listen so that something new, particular to us, happened. And I want us to be able to ask those questions and listen back carefully to each other in the next year. Well, what do we want to see happen? And what can we live with? And what can we dream about to do something different? To make sure that apocalypse doesn't mean the end, but can mean new beginning. The lesbian poet Adrienne Rich, whose contemporary reading we used at the beginning, wrote this poem about New England, a winter poem, where winter has a meaning, I think is the phrase in her poem. I think it has a meaning here too. But, and she urges people to wait without sadness and with grave impatience. Not sadly, but in anticipation that something new can happen. Here's my definite prayer, that Congregational Church of the Peninsula and Community Church of San Carlos can wait together without sadness and with great anticipation